Hi there. Have you ever been in one of these two situations? On one side, you're showing up to training camp watching your favorite team, and you're filled with hope and faith because your team just acquired two players that no one's ever heard of. And on the other side, you're showing up to training camp and you're feeling invigorated because your team just acquired an all-star offensive lineman, and all it cost you was two players that no one has ever heard of. Well, this is the year 2000, and here's the story of Kahari Jones.
I think the wrong number. In any event, it's a first down for the Bombers. Play action. Jones looking downfield. Touchdown. Milt Stiegel. Touchdown number 11 on
Blue Bombers at the 6. Kahari Jones straight back to pass into the end zone. Wide open. Touchdown. Milt Stiegel for the Blue Bombers.
In 1999, Dave Ritchie and Brendan Taman signed on with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers to end the, at that time, 9-year Grey Cup drought. Who would have thought that we would be longing for those times in Winnipeg? Yeah. Anyway, long story short, they decided to pull off a trade, acquire Kerwin Bell and some prospects. And by the way, I'm not doing that trade tree. There's nothing coming out of it. Don't even think about it. And they also had Chris Perez, who was an All-Star coming off from 1997-98 season. Well, 99 was his last season in Winnipeg. Dave Ritchie said, well, we're not getting the production out of our offense, and who would have thought? Kerwin Bell coming off a 4,000-plus yard season in Toronto, Milt Stiegel, G. Simon, Robert Gordon catching passes, and they ended the season 6-12. Well, Winnipeg pulls off the deal with the BC Lions, and this is the deal. BC Lions acquire all-star offensive lineman Chris Perez. Now, you're probably, Chris Perez doesn't have name value 20 years later, but at the time, he was a bona fide great offensive lineman, winning all-star nods on his team every freaking year. Grey Cup champion in Toronto, not so much in Winnipeg, but you can't fault him for that. What did he do in BC? Well, another all-star nominee, and this happened.
And they've done it again here. From underdogs to Lion Kings, the BC Lions are Grey Cup champions.
So that right there, when you make a trade in the CFL or for any league, the goal of when you make these trades is you want to win the Grey Cup. And that's what BC did. They made a move, they traded some assets, and they won the Grey Cup. That's what you want to do. That's what you need to do, and that's what happened. What did Winnipeg get out of the deal? Well, before we go to there, what did Chris Perez do? In 2001, signed off with the XFL with the Chicago Enforcers and never saw the CFL after the fact. So, that's one and done. That's an easy side of a trade tree. Let's see if Winnipeg complicates things. Well, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers acquired for Chris Perez a 2000 fourth-round pick in Kahari Jones. Well, let's just end the surprise here and say that the 2000 fourth-round pick is Marcus Howell. Well, Marcus Howell's from Winnipeg, and he had a very, very good rookie year, had a very good sophomore year, had a very good junior year. I guess, could we call it a junior year if it's professional league? I don't know. I don't know. In 2000, his rookie season, he had close to 300 yards, one touchdown. In 2001, exceeded that by 300 plus yards. Very, very good, reliable. And I know in previous videos when I said Jada Chan and Daniel Peterman in their history in their first 2 years in Winnipeg, they had 280 yards, close to. Well, Marcus Howell exceeded that in the year 2000, his rookie year. Very, 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 very good. Very underrated. Keep that in mind is that you're thinking, hey, that's not really that great. You'd have to consider that, who was he behind? I don't know, in year 2000, there's a guy named Milt Stiegel, G. Simon, Albert Johnson III, Robert Gordon, Jamie Stoddard. Jamie Stoddard was just kind of equivalent to Howell. In 2001, Simon Johnson go to the NFL. In comes, a guy named Arlen Bruce. All these all-stars, surefire Hall of Famers. In front of Marcus Howell, of course he's not going to get any kind of opportunity because he's behind Hall of Famers. Well, 2004 comes along and he has his worst season statistically, 2 catches for 17 yards. Not great. Why are we talking like he's great? I'm not talking like he's great. That's a down year, yes, until you consider the fact that he was actually converted with other receivers to defensive back because Winnipeg had an ineptitude of signing defensive talent that year. So Marcus Howell at the end of 2004 signs as a free agent with the Ottawa Renegades, who then folded and was taken by Calgary in the dispersal draft and wins a Grey Cup 2 years after that. So kudos to Marcus Howell. The other part of that gets interesting. That's where the moving pieces come into play. Kahari Jones. Now, what did the Winnipeg Blue Bombers expect to get out of Kahari Jones? Well, at the time, his pass completion percentage was hovering around 50%. 97 and didn't play at all, practice roster. 98 had a couple of snaps, less than 400 yards, 1 interception, and he got sacked. 99 had a little bit more opportunity, 55% completion percentage, sacked once, no touchdowns, no interceptions. In 2000, though, that's when things grew. Now, we didn't know what Kahari Jones was going to amount to at this time until week 3 of the year 2000. That was the game that Kes McCorvey of the Edmonton Eskimos. By the way, at this recording, I shouldn't call them Eskimos. They're the Edmonton Football Club right now. Kes McCorvey scored 4 touchdowns in one game. That was also the game that Albert Johnson III set a CFL record for most all-purpose yards. And it was also the time that Kerwin Bell started seeing his writing on the wall that he's got to shape up and fly right. Kahari Jones came in after injury and threw for a lot of yards. In fact, he threw for close to over 4,000 yards the rest of the season, which is great because he only started 14 games. Amazing. Kerwin Bell was released halfway through the 2000 season, signed on with the Toronto Argonauts, and he did this.
Nice take by Kerwin Bell. And he walks into the end zone with amazing speed. Kerwin Bell blazes his way into the end zone, and now flags fly all over the place, I should say. And it'll be against the Bombers. Bell hammered the ball.
He's talking noise, I think.
Oh, and he hit himself. That one bounced out.
2001, he threw again for over 4,100 yards, a lot of touchdowns, but he started getting sacked a lot. Put a lot of little force on his shoulder. But that worked out to be good enough for a most outstanding player nominee, and he won the award. One would question that he probably should have won the Grey Cup that year, but we're not talking about that. We might talk about that in a couple of minutes. You'll see. Kahari Jones in 2002 threw for over 5,000 yards, 46 touchdowns, almost catching Doug Flutie's record for touchdowns in a season. That close. Milt Stegall, his primary target, ended up getting the most outstanding player. 2003 was interesting. Just over 4,000 yards, 25 touchdowns, 15 interceptions. That sounds like a manageable career. Wonder who his offensive coordinator was. 2004 was pretty much the end of Kahari Jones in Winnipeg at the very least. So he tried to revitalize his career at some point, but we'll get on that in a couple of seconds. The Winnipeg Blue Bombers had signed and were actually acquired, and we're not doing that trade tree either, a young up-and-coming quarterback. You might know him, Kevin Glenn. Kahari Jones, while Dave Ritchie was fired, Brendan Tammany said, hey, this is my team. We need to trade the guy who's now making multi-million dollars over 4 years and is riding the pine. Made a call to Matt Dunnigan in Calgary and said, hey, Matt, do you want a quarterback? He said yes, and there's the trade. So the Winnipeg Blue Bombers sent Kahari Jones, Randy Bowles, and a 4th-round draft pick in 2006 to the Calgary Stampeders. Now, before we get into what Winnipeg acquired, let's go into what they did with Calgary. Kahari Jones, 400 yards, again, hovering around 50% completion percentage, 54.6 to be exact. 5 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. He even ran in a couple of touchdowns on his own. Not exactly the best, but not terrible compared to how he started 2004 with Winnipeg. At the end of 2004, they all had intent and purposes to retaining Kahari Jones for 2005, but new management, they decided to go dip into the free agent pool, sign Henry Burris and Jermaine Copeland. Now, Jermaine Copeland made things a little bit awkward by saying at a press conference, hey, I can't wait to catch passes, touchdown passes from one Henry Burris. And Khari Jones says, hey, what am I, chopped liver? And Calgary says, no, you're not, because you're cut. Khari Jones then signed as a free agent with Hamilton Tiger Cats, not exactly the best ending to a Hall of Fame kind of career. Signed on with the Edmonton Eskimos, only to be cut through training camp, and signed a one-day contract with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers to retire. Enjoyed a one-year stint with the CFL and CBC as a sideline reporter. However, because TSN bought exclusive broadcasting rights with the CFL, that ended there, and he decided to opt into coaching, which is now in a prominent role with the Montreal Alouettes as we speak. Randy Bowles. That's an interesting part of this trade, because when Randy Bowles was acquired by the Winnipeg Blue Bombers through free agency, they were hoping to revitalize the fullback position, because in the last 2 years prior to that, they had a guy by the name of Mike Sellers. Mike Sellers is a guy, the closest current, well, there isn't a closest current, but the closest recent memory would be Chris Zark of the Saskatchewan Roughriders. It's a guy you just give the ball, it was automatic 5-6 yards, and then some, because he can carry all the tacklers with him. Gang tackling was huge in this era in about 2002, 2003, went off to the NFL, and I think the Winnipeg Blue Bombers were just obsessed with bringing back that fullback position to be a dominant role. Problem is that you had Charles Roberts. Roberts did not like to share the backfield, and it was evident. The only reason he shared it with Mike Sellers is I think Mike Sellers threatened to eat him, which is a very possible. Randy Bowles' time in Calgary was short-lived. He didn't last past the 2004 season, had 1 carry for 5 yards. That's a write-off. That 2006 fourth-round pick ended up being offensive lineman out of the University of Manitoba, Riley Clayton. Riley Clayton, not exactly expected to be a brand name in the future. He was expected to be a good 6th option on the offensive line. Played 1 game, suited up for 18, never amounted to anything. He was cut after that season. And here's the kicker. Riley Clayton signed on with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers to their practice squad halfway through the 2007 season. Didn't make it to the main squad. Finished the season on the practice roster, and by rule was a free agent. And then he re-signed with the Bombers in 2008, only to be cut into training camp. So that side of thing is there with the Calgary Stampeders. Who did the Winnipeg Blue Bombers get out of this? Well, in exchange for those 3, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers got Joe Fleming, Scott Regenbold, and Wes Lysak. Joe Fleming, it was interesting. Bomber fans were expecting the Joe Fleming of the late 90s before he bolted to the NFL, only to come back to the CFL and sign with Calgary. I think Bomber management were kind of hoping to erase the stench of how the 2001 Grey Cup game ended. I thought I was not going to talk about that. Why do I do this to myself? Oh well. At the end of the 2004 season, he had played about 4 or 5 games, 13 tackles, 1 forced fumble, and 1 sack. Not exactly the best thing, but it was an okay. Having a rookie defensive end in Tom Canada playing alongside Alfred Payne and, of course, Hall of Famer Doug Brown, it was great. In 2005, he had those same players as expect, and now a new rookie in Gavin Walls. Very good front 4. He amounts to 38 tackles, 5 sacks, 1 forced fumble, 1 fumble recovery. Great 2005 season, and then he retired from football after that. So that ends with that. In Scott Regenbold, they get a guy who, I don't know, if you weren't going to use a fullback, why are you acquiring a fullback? Case in point, Scott Regenbold's 2005 season was not exactly the best until you get to 1 game where he amassed a majority of his stats, 64 yards rushing, 65 yards pass, and 2 touchdowns. That game, by the way, if you're looking for ESPN Classics on CFL or ESPN Classic, whatever they call it right now, a game against the Montreal Alouettes in 2005. It was Winnipeg's first win. I believe it might have been Montreal's first loss. I digress. I can't remember. I didn't want to fact check that part. Scott Regenbold was used quite often, early and often, and in fact, actually, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers actually had a sizable lead at halftime, which they almost gave up. It was their first win, so you knew that Winnipeg was going to make things difficult. You just knew it. Scott Regenbold wasn't used, but you know who was used? This guy. Yeah, the current CEO of the Winnipeg Blue Bombers for some reason had enough clout to get more touches than the guy that you just traded a franchise quarterback for. I'm ranting more than dissecting. Third part of that trade is Wes Lysak. Wes Lysak is Winnipeg, University of Manitoba. Great deal. First couple of games in Winnipeg in 2004 to end the 2004 season. 18 tackles, 1 interception, and a hell of a lot of hits. In 2005, he had 71 tackles, 1 interception. That's not bad. Before we get into the after effects of that, I want to go back here, because if you were around in this era, you were scouring CFL, team message boards, and if you believe what you read, a lot of these players, or some of these players, got on the phone with former teammates in Calgary, most noted of which Wayne McGarity, Willie Fells, William Fields, and said, hey, we want you to come join us in Winnipeg in 2005 because we got a great thing going. Spoiler alert, they didn't. Picture this right now as the fantasy GM. You're looking at, by virtue of this, Kahari Jones, Randy Bowles, and a draft pick for Fleming, Lysak, Reginald, McGarity, Fells, and Field. That's a hell of a catch. However, I'm going to ask you to forget everything I said in the last 2 minutes, because this is a CFL trade tree, not a trade tree with those incoming players playing the role of GMs. Not exactly how this rolls out. Now, I went to go ahead and mention 71 tackles in 2005. That's not a bad year. What makes it even worse is the fact that he didn't finish the season in Winnipeg. The Winnipeg Blue Bombers traded Wes Lysak back to Calgary in exchange for future considerations and defensive back Anthony Malbrough. Malbrough played 1 game in 2005, had 1 tackle, not exactly the greatest, but 2006 to 2008, under the tutelage of Doug Barry as head coach and Greg Marshall as defensive coordinator, was great. Anthony Malbrough didn't get his first interception as a member of the Bombers until 2008, which is why they didn't throw to him. That's how great he was. And Mike Kelly came into Winnipeg and said, old players gone, new players in, sent Anthony Malbrough to the Edmonton Eskimos in exchange for future considerations. Now, Dalts, now you're probably asking, hey, what's up with those future considerations? Well, as much as I could try to find, I couldn't find any information. So there's a couple of things that you want to look for as future considerations in the CFL. Most notable is sometimes future considerations are rights to a negotiating list player. It also could be a conditional pick, or maybe even a promise not to take a player in a certain pick, or lunch at Subway with Brendan Taman, whatever you want to look at it. Anthony Malbrough didn't last that long. He lasted the whole season in Edmonton, and he retired from the CFL after that. And that is the story of Kahari Jones. Who won this trade? We know BC did, because they won the Grey Cup. They also won the Grey Cup again in 2006 before this trade tree ended. Now, nobody from this trade tree was on BC's team, so we're not going to pretend that this trade provided BC 2 Grey Cups, but it was a long road to respectability for the BC Lions, and I think that 2000 Grey Cup just started the trend. Calgary, they got fleeced. There's no way around it. They got fleeced in that trade in 2004. However, sometimes you just have to right a wrong, and what they did is they acquired Wes Lysak back to Calgary, and all it cost them was a international defensive back. They ended up winning the Grey Cup in 2008. Now, we're not going to say that Wes Lysak was a determining factor, but if you're going to right the wrong, at least you can also say that you won the Grey Cup after the fact. The Winnipeg Blue Bombers, yeah, they didn't win the Grey Cup. Duh, we've heard 1990 up until 2019 and November 23rd, because they won the Grey Cup November 24th. The Winnipeg Blue Bombers come out great. And yeah, they didn't have a lot of success as far as Grey Cup championships go, but they got 1,200 yards receiving out of Marcus Howell. They got close to 25,000 yards throwing by Kahari Jones. They got a most outstanding player year. They got 2 trips to the Grey Cup during this trade tree. They got some production out of Wes Lysak and some Joe Fleming and Scott Reginald. They also got 3 years of stability in the defensive backfield from Anthony Malbrough. So for one trade that sent the BC Lions to the Grey Cup, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers didn't get success that they wanted, but they got more than enough and full value out of the trade, not only from the year 2000, but from 2004. Yeah, you kind of want to win the Grey Cup, and they failed in that, but you got to give them a passing grade for this. Well, that'll end this video for the CFL Trade Shoot Episode 2. Yes, this is the true Episode 2. If you liked what you saw, tell your friends, share this, leave a comment on what you thought, and if you have any more suggestions, again, leave a comment below. If you want to communicate outside of here, hey, give us a follow on Twitter at my podcast, Rouge Radio, at Rouge Radio, myself, at Rouge Dalts. And again, this has been powered by the Canadian Football Podcast Network. You can follow them at CF Pod Network on Twitter.